My family had a way of turning celebrations into stages for humiliation. At my mother's birthday dinner, in a room filled with relatives, neighbors, and business partners, she raised her glass and smiled as if she were about to deliver a blessing. Instead, she looked me directly in the eye and said, "You'll never understand, family. You never even gave us a grandchild." Laughter rolled across the table. Subtle smirks spread among my siblings. And in that moment, every sacrifice I had made for them meant nothing. I had covered debts, poured years of work into keeping their image spotless. And still, my worth was measured by the absence of a child. Sitting there under the glow of chandeliers, I realized this wasn't just a careless remark. It was a declaration that I didn't belong. And that was the night everything began to change. I had always been the responsible one. In every family, there's a child who shoulders the weight no one else wants to carry. And in mine, that was me. My brother was celebrated as the financial prodigy, the one who worked on Wall Street and wore tailored suits as if they were stitched directly to his skin. My sister was adored for her picture-perfect suburban life, complete with a husband, 2 children, and Instagram-worthy vacations. They were constantly praised for living out what my parents considered the American dream. And me? I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital as a nurse, often clocking out at dawn, only to come home and open another bill with my father's name on it, a bill that I would quietly pay before heading to bed. From the outside, it looked as though I had made choices that left me without a husband, without children, without the symbols of success my family worshipped. But what no one ever saw, or chose not to see, was how much I poured into everyone else's survival. When my brother's risky investments drained his savings, I was the one who sent money to cover his mortgage so his wife wouldn't find out. When my sister's childcare costs skyrocketed, I was the one who slipped her cash so she could keep her perfect lifestyle intact. And when my father's gambling debts caught up with him, it was my paycheck that bought him another chance at saving face. My sacrifices weren't grand or glamorous. They were small, invisible stitches holding together a fabric that was already fraying. But that's the thing about invisible work. It's easy for people to pretend it doesn't exist. My family loved to highlight what my siblings had, the things you could photograph, brag about, parade in front of others. They had weddings, children, houses, and flashy careers. I had reliability, I had responsibility, but apparently I never had enough. Every holiday was a stage play, and the roles were already written. My brother would brag about his latest deal. My sister would show off photos of her children, and my parents would beam with pride. Then there was me, quiet, tired, smiling, faintly as though I didn't notice how the spotlight always skipped over me. If I dared to share an accomplishment, like earning a promotion, saving a patient's life, or buying my own small condo, it was met with polite nods before the conversation. Drifted back to babies or bank accounts. I told myself for years that it didn't matter. I convinced myself that being needed was better than being praised, that the gratitude I longed for would come eventually, once the sacrifices stacked high enough to be undeniable. I believed that one day, my parents would look at me and finally see that the child who gave up everything to support them had value. But that day never came. Instead, my family grew comfortable with the arrangement. They assumed I'd always be there to clean up their messes, to open my wallet when theirs ran dry, to hold my tongue when their remarks stung. They never asked if it was sustainable, if I was okay, if I had dreams beyond being their silent safety net. They didn't care that my life was a cycle of work and obligation, that my own happiness was always placed on a shelf so theirs could stay intact. What hurt the most wasn't even the lack of recognition. It was the certainty that my contributions were dismissed because they weren't traditional. I didn't give my parents grandchildren, so in their eyes, everything else was diminished. I wasn't a wife, so the long nights I endured to keep them afloat didn't count. They wanted a legacy they could show off, not sacrifices they could never admit to needing. Still, I stayed. I kept paying, kept helping, kept swallowing the sting of their favoritism. Because deep down, I thought loyalty was a form of love, and I was desperate to prove that I was worth belonging. But what I didn't realize back then was that loyalty without respect isn't love at all. It's servitude. And I had been serving a family that never intended to honor me in return. Looking back now, I see how blind I was, how much I wanted to believe that my efforts meant something. I see the dinners where my mother gushed over my sister's children while ignoring the fact that I had just worked a 70-hour week. I see the birthdays where my father raised a glass to my brother's promotions while dismissing the money I quietly funneled into his accounts to keep him from financial ruin. I see the countless times I smiled through gritted teeth, telling myself it was enough just to be present, just to help, just to be needed. But the truth was simple, even if I didn't want to face it. In my family's eyes, being responsible was never going to be enough. And it took one cruel public remark for me to finally understand that I was not their savior. I was their scapegoat. The night of the betrayal is burned into my memory with a sharpness I can't shake. It was supposed to be a celebration, the kind of event families mark on their calendars months in advance. My father's milestone birthday had drawn relatives from across the country, old neighbors who hadn't been seen in decades, and colleagues who wanted to pay their respects to the man who had built a name for himself in our community. The banquet hall glowed under chandeliers, tables dressed in crisp white linen, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne. On the surface, it was the kind of night meant to honor legacy and love. But for me, it became the night that stripped away every illusion I had clung to about where I stood in my family. I remember walking into that hall and feeling the weight of eyes as my sister made her entrance behind me. She had her children in tow, a perfectly curated picture of motherhood, and the room erupted with praise. People bent down to compliment her children, shook her husband's hand, and told my parents how proud they must be. My brother followed, soon after, arriving late as usual, but greeted like a celebrity. Conversations swirled about his career moves, his new car, the size of his home. My parents' faces beamed with pride at both of them. Then their eyes landed on me, and the warmth seemed to flicker. There were no excited gasps, no questions about my work, no acknowledgement of the countless sacrifices I had made to keep their lives intact. Just a polite nod, as if I were another guest and not their daughter. As the night went on, I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd be recognized during the speeches. I stood off to the side, sipping watered-down champagne, forcing smiles when relatives asked the obligatory questions. Was I dating anyone? Did I ever plan to settle down? When I answered with a shrug and a laugh, the conversation ended quickly, as though I were a topic unworthy of further exploration. My career, my independence, my sacrifices, they weren't stories anyone at that table wanted to hear. Then came the moment I'll never forget. My father tapped his glass, the metallic ring silencing the room. He stood tall, the center of attention, and began his speech with the authority he always carried. He spoke of family, of the importance of tradition, of the pride he felt watching his children grow into adults. For a fleeting second, I thought this might be it. That he would acknowledge me, if not for my choices, then at least for my loyalty. But instead, he turned the knife. Family, he said, is about legacy. It's about passing on your name, your blood, your values. I am proud to have children who understand this, who gave me grandchildren, who carried our family forward. His words lingered like smoke in the air, suffocating and inescapable. Then he looked at me, his lips curled into a half smile, almost playful, but the cruelty behind it was unmistakable. And some of us, he added, pausing for effect, will never understand family at all. After all, you can't understand family if you never even gave us one. Laughter rippled through the room. Not thunderous, but enough to make my skin burn. My sister smirked over her glass of wine. My brother chuckled low, and a few cousins exchanged knowing glances. My mother didn't laugh, but she didn't speak either. Her eyes darted to the tablecloth as if she could disappear into it. No. One came to my defense. No one said, "That was too harsh," or "She's family too." My existence was reduced to a punchline in a room full of people I had spent my life serving. That single remark. My value in their eyes was not measured by loyalty or sacrifice. It was measured by children I didn't have, by boxes I hadn't checked on their list of what makes a life worthy of pride. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not in an outburst, but in a quiet, shattering realization. This wasn't a slip of the tongue, a careless remark that could be forgiven. It was the truth my family had always believed, finally spoken out loud. I was less than. I was incomplete. And in their eyes, I was expendable. As I stood there in silence, the room moved on without me. Glasses clinked, toasts continued, laughter returned. I was still present, still standing in the middle of it all. But I might as well have been invisible. That was the betrayal, not just in the words spoken, but in the collective agreement of everyone who let them hang in the air without objection. The betrayal was in the smirks, the chuckles, the silence of people who could have defended me but chose comfort over conscience. That night crystallized everything I had refused to admit to myself. I wasn't the dutiful daughter. I wasn't the dependable sibling. I wasn't even family, not really, not to them. I was a placeholder, a resource, a utility. And when they were done using me, they could mock me and discard me without hesitation. It was in that realization, as the noise of celebration carried on around me, that I understood something life-altering. Blood ties don't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes, the people you sacrifice the most for are the very ones who will gut you when the moment suits them. The sound of laughter still echoed in my ears long after my father's words faded. It wasn't loud, not even cruel in tone, but that made it worse. It was casual, effortless, the kind of laughter that told me the people I had sacrificed for weren't even aware of the knife they had driven into me. They thought it was harmless, a passing joke at my expense, nothing more. But sitting there at that polished table, under the glow of chandeliers and surrounded by the hum of celebration, I felt a humiliation so sharp it left me breathless. My chest tightened as I glanced around the room, searching for a face. Any face that might show sympathy. But my brother's smirk only deepened as he leaned toward a colleague, whispering something that earned another chuckle. My sister pretended to adjust her child's napkin, a small, satisfied grin tugging at her lips. My mother couldn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on her wine glass as though the pattern of bubbles held the answer to her silence. And in that instant, the truth struck me like a blow. No one was going to defend me. Not one person in that room was going to stand up and say, "Enough." The weight of years crashed down on me. Late nights at the hospital, overtime hours spent not for luxuries but for their survival, the bills I paid without credit, the support I gave without question. None of it mattered. In their eyes, my value had always been conditional, and because I didn't carry a child on my hip or a husband on my arm, I would never measure up to the mold they had carved for me long before I even knew who I was. Humiliation has a strange way of slowing time. I could hear the clink of silverware against porcelain, the shuffle of waiters pouring more champagne, the rise and fall of voices as the celebration moved forward. But for me, the world narrowed to the hollow thud of my heartbeat and the burning flush across my face. Every instinct told me to shout, to call out the hypocrisy, to remind every person at that table of the times I had been their lifeline. I wanted to scream the truth loud enough to drown out their smug laughter. But I didn't. Instead, I sat perfectly still, letting the moment carve itself into me. Because sometimes silence is heavier than words, and I wanted that silence to be the thing they remembered. I wanted them to feel it when they looked at my empty chair one day and realized I was gone. I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of wood against marble catching a few glances, though no one stopped me. I set my napkin on the table with deliberate care, as if I had all the time in the world. My hands didn't tremble, my voice didn't rise. I didn't beg for understanding or lash out in anger. I simply stood, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and walked toward the door. Every step felt like a release. The noise of the room grew fainter, the sting of humiliation dulled into something sharper, cleaner. By the time I reached the exit, I wasn't thinking about the laughter anymore. I was thinking about the years I had wasted believing that sacrifice would buy me belonging. I was thinking about the freedom waiting outside those doors, a freedom I had never dared to claim. When the cool night air hit my skin, I inhaled deeply, as though I hadn't taken a full breath in years. The city stretched out before me, indifferent and alive, and for the first time I realized I didn't need their approval to exist. My worth wasn't tied to their praise, their traditions, or the boxes they thought I should have checked by now. Humiliation had cut me open, but in that rawness, I found clarity. They would never see me, not truly, and I would never belong in a family that measured love by conformity and mocked sacrifice as weakness. So I made the decision right there on the steps of that banquet hall, not with a dramatic speech or a tearful plea, but with the cold certainty of someone who had finally woken up. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table where I was only ever meant to be the punchline. I walked away that night, not in defeat, but in liberation. No shouting, no begging, just silence. And that silence, I knew, would echo louder than any words I could have spoken. Walking out of that banquet hall was only the beginning. For days afterward, I replayed the scene in my head, my father's smirk, the ripple of laughter, the silence of everyone who could have spoken up, but didn't. But instead of breaking me, the memory hardened into resolve. I realized I had spent most of my adult life being their invisible safety net. And if I wanted to take my power back, all I had to do was cut the strings. The first step was financial. For years, I had been quietly funneling my paycheck into the cracks of their carefully curated lives. I was the one covering the shortfalls in the family business when payroll came due, the one wiring money into my brother's account when his investments tanked, the one slipping my sister cash so she could maintain the lifestyle she bragged about on social media. None of it had been acknowledged. None of it had been respected. So I stopped. One by one, I canceled the automatic transfers, closed out the joint accounts, and redirected the money back into my own future. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical, precise, and final. At first, they didn't notice. Wealth and comfort can mask the absence of support for a little while. But soon, the cracks began to spread. My father's business started missing payments, the suppliers growing restless. My brother's so-called empire of investments crumbled without my quiet injections of cash, and his wife's patience wore thin. My sister, used to leaning on me for everything from school tuition to mortgage payments, suddenly found her credit cards maxed out and no cushion to fall back on. The empire they flaunted, the image they polished for years, began collapsing under its own weight. The phone calls started as irritation. "Hey, did something happen with the transfer? Maybe you forgot." Then they turned into accusations. "You're being selfish, Margot. You know we can't handle this without you." Eventually, they became desperate pleas. My father's voice cracked on the line, my sister cried, my brother's arrogance dissolved into panic. But I didn't answer. For weeks, I let the phone ring. I let their texts pile up, unread and unanswered. Each vibration of my phone was a reminder that for the first time in my life, they needed me more than I needed them. And I wasn't going to rescue them. Not this time. It wasn't easy. Years of conditioning had trained me to respond, to drop everything when they called. I had to fight the instinct to give in, to fix, to save. But every time I thought about bending, I remembered that night. I remembered the laughter, the smirks, the glass raised to my humiliation, and I let the memory steel me against their cries. Eventually, I picked up the phone. Not to cave, not to help, but to end it on my terms. My father's voice came through, thinner than I had ever heard it. He spoke of mistakes, of family, of needing me to be reasonable. My sister tried to chime in, reminding me of all the times she had been there for me, which was laughable given the reality. My brother demanded I think of the family name, the reputation at stake. I listened. And then I answered, my voice calm, almost tender, but laced with ice. "You told me I didn't understand family. You told me I didn't belong. Now you'll understand what life looks like without me." And before they could respond, I hung up. In the weeks that followed, the silence between us grew into a canyon. I stopped attending gatherings, stopped responding to messages, stopped pretending I had a place at a table that had mocked me. And as their world unraveled, business deals collapsing, marriages straining, reputations faltering, I found a strange, quiet peace. I didn't need to gloat or broadcast their downfall. Watching from a distance, knowing they had finally been forced to face the consequences of a life built on arrogance and dependency, was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind you see in movies where the villain is exposed in front of a crowd or the hero storms out with triumphant words. My revenge was colder, sharper, more enduring. It was absence. It was silence. It was the deliberate choice to let them live with the emptiness they had tried to assign to me, and in that absence, I found myself. For the first time, my energy went into building my own life, not propping up theirs. The money I once poured into their debts became the foundation of my independence. The time I once spent cleaning up their mistakes became time invested in my own growth. And the voice they had silenced for so long finally had room to speak, not to them, but to myself. They had tried to erase me with a single cruel line. Instead, I erased myself from their world, and without me, their empire crumbled. In the end, I learned that revenge doesn't always come with shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. The coldest kind of revenge isn't about raising your voice, it's about lowering it to silence. By stepping back, by refusing to carry the weight they piled onto me, I gave them exactly what they feared most: life without me. The bills, the arguments, the cracks in their perfect image, those were never mine to fix. And when I stopped patching up the holes, the whole structure they had built on my back finally collapsed. It didn't take fire or fury to bring it down. It took nothing more than absence. Sometimes the cruelest revenge is walking away, and letting the empire they built on your sacrifices crumble without you. And now I'll ask you, have you ever been mocked or dismissed by the very people you gave everything for? Have you had to learn, like I did, that silence can cut deeper than words? Share your story in the comments below, because your voice matters here. And if you want more stories of betrayal, boundaries, and cold revenge, don't forget to subscribe.